and I brought a selection of Blotter to show you. This is the first hit on paper, and it was called the computer dot or the spot or the acid on paper, and it was done on chromatography paper that was used for litmusing, and that's why it looks, after all these years, this is from the 60s, after all these years, it still looks lily wide. The chromatography paper was very hard to get, and it used to be arranged in a little 5x20 setup where 5 of these would go in a row and then down 20 times. So there would be 100 doses on a little strip of paper, and each dose was 1,000 mics, so they were considered 4 ways. The first grams of LSD being divided into 4,000 hits per gram. Nothing's in order here, so we'll just keep moving. This is a close-up of a Blotter sheet from the early 80s, and it's using a little image that you will see later, and it's from Farm Chem. Okay, thanks. Oh, man. I came with the Mac program, and everyone's on IBM here. Oh, man. This is a close-up of a cutaway diamond 4-way from the late 70s, I'm sorry. This is, before the computer, Blotter was made by photographic methods, and this is the matrix used for the famous Eye in the Pyramid hit. And this was very, very large. It was about 2 by 3 feet when they silk screened the original, and then they photographed it and reduced it and pasted it up into a larger format, copied it and reduced it again into 400 pyramids. Oh my. This is how I feel about LSD. Yeah, and I really don't think it's about love. I think love exists outside of LSD. This is a 400 block, back still when the grams were only 4,000 hits per gram. The standard being set really by Albert himself in the first experiment, and then propagated by Owsley. Here's a current thing you can buy on eBay, and I thought it was a really neat statement that Marcel Duchamp would enjoy. Here's a Blotter collector of nowadays with returning the stolen LSD to the people. A current novel featuring Blotter and the story of Albert Hofmann, done by one of the, pardon? I would ask John Hanna. He knows the fairy that made these. Here's a book you can get on eBay if you really know your way around eBay, and it's about the group of people who originate in San Francisco and decide that they're going to turn on the world with their magic papers. Very interesting little novel. But I wanted to just show you that Blotter is starting to appear on book covers and in places where in the 70s it was impossible to find. Even in the 80s, very rarely do you see any portrayals of Blotter anywhere, because the DEA wasn't really aware of Blotter paper for a very, very long time. And So now it's reemerging, and people are collecting it and putting it in other situations. Here's a 1,000 hits of Jerry's hand that are featured in a book called Zigzag Zen. And they were made in late '98 and busted on 20th and Valencia Street in San Francisco. Here's a vanity piece featuring, I call it vanity piece because it's blotter paper that isn't made with the intention of dipping it and distributing LSD, but more as a way of asserting your stance on the LSD question and as a way of turning it into an artistic statement rather than a commercial statement. And this one's signed by Howard Marks, the famous marijuana dealer. This is currently available also on eBay, and it's a little outfit out of England that is trying to find classic blotters and then reinvent them. This one being the famous Mickey's Fantasia that was originally dipped in Sandoz acid. Also available on eBay, a man, let me see, are you here? What's your name? William Rafty sells these on eBay, and they're a takeoff of the Stars and Waves from the early '80s. And I thought, oh boy, this is incredible. Somebody's selling these and advertising these when 20 years ago, this would get you certainly a sentence. This one seems to be moving, and it's probably is. Also available on eBay, and it's part of the Vanity series, which has multiple uses. In black, if your sauce is black. A recent release from the Acid Test 40 in Las Vegas just now, featuring a melting Uncle Sam. This one just got busted, and what's very interesting about it is that the little beetle was sold as a vanity blotter, and so then somebody's going and buying them off eBay and then dipping them. So then they exist both as vanity, or they were created as vanity, but then some enterprising young person, here's something you'd never see in the old days, is someone putting their name on a sheet of blotter. This one being, a fabulous effort to raise money for the tsunami relief. This one by artist Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo fame is taking a stance and saying, yes, I believe in acid. The famous local artist, Geiger. And this is his second piece, and he did another blotter sheet, one of which Albert signed. I guess he signed 3 of them. If you can grab one, get it. His first piece, 1,000 hits. Stanley Mouse's recent piece, and Stanley, for years, his imagery has been stolen and used on blotter, and then Stanley said, well, why don't I start doing it myself? This is his 3rd issue. The great artist Jim Thirlwell, whose band Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel is featured, also taking a stance saying, yes, acid's for me. Alex Gray, coming out of the closet. His first blotter, as a vanity piece, that is. Some kind of weird relationship going on there. One of my favorite, Mark Ryden from Southern California, with his portrayal of Satanic Majesty's Request. The Kesey family, who still survives. This one by Zane Kesey. A Japanese artist. You remember this one? Trevor Brown. The Trevor Brown doing a portrayal of Blotter, which is, you know, maybe she's a little underage, but at least she's picking it herself. The Incredible Mind States Blotter by Stevie Postman. This one signed and numbered by the great master himself. Nothing says I do like a piece of Albert Hofmann blotter hanging over the bed. One of the earliest vanity blotters, and it was done by writer, cook, and entrepreneur Tom Lytle, who did 6 early blotters in the mid-90s and had celebrities sign them, like Laura Huxley, Tim Leary, even Allen Ginsberg signed some, the Shulgins, many other famous Illuminati. And I heard that John Beresford, our the pinnacle of fortitude, John Beresford, is selling these signed ones by the Huxleys and others. And he's giving the money for the prisoners of LSD fund. He'll be here tomorrow with his blotter selling, if you'd like some. You can't think of a better cause. This was in a CD in the early 90s, and the musician put it out without thinking there'd be any problem, and then people started getting arrested coming home from Tower Records with their unopened little CDs and having to wait one kid waiting in Texas for 2 weeks till they analyzed the stuff. I forget his name. Richie Hawtins. This is an also early vanity blotter by Hunter S. Thompson, celebrating Timmy's return to the egg. Fred Tomaselli, famous New York artist, also a famous drug artist, who put a perf sheet of blotter on one of his art catalogs in the late 80s. This is the first hit I ever saw on blotter with an image. And it was a 4-way, printed both sides. I scarfed the one I had, so I never found another real one, but I was in Texas doing a blotter show, and I went to the record store on a Rocky Erickson picture album. There was one pasted up on there, and I remembered it. Oh, damn, sorry. Here's The Matrix. I took that from Rocky's record. The real king of rock and roll, Rocky Erickson and the 13th Floor Elevators. Behind the OK, you'll see one of the first pieces of blotter portrayed in a movie, and it was a movie called... Well, starring Alan Alda as a LSD chemist who's hiding in New Mexico. And when the FBI comes to arrest him, he serves them an acid-laced dinner and gets away to Mexico. And as he's leaving, he opens his drawer, and of course, it's the Ronnie Reagan blotter in there. Flirting with disaster. Thank you so much. I have a photographic memory. They just don't make film for it anymore. This is the last piece of blotter busted by the forces of evil on earth. And it was in St. Martin's, a little Dutch island, in 2005. May his suffering be shortened by this meeting. A real nice one coming out, a current one, coming out of, I suspect, by the Perf Bite, Amsterdam, featuring their traditional little ohms done in a new way. Something I haven't been able to identify yet because my eyesight hasn't gotten in there yet, but this may not be LSD. Pardon? Mescalina. Thank you so much. And so now there's other drugs taking place on blotter paper. A very recent effort out of Texas. A boob. Also current. A couple of flies that I heard that these may not be LSD either. This was one I got at Bonnaroo in 2004. By the look of it, I think it's Archangel Gabriel because of the trumpet. That had no perf marks, and it had a grid pattern on the back to cut along, 100 hits of Gabriel. Also, from the previous year, 100 hits of white Tara, also on perf, printed, grid pattern printed on the back. A couple 4 hits of eyes. 1,000 Cherubs out of San Francisco, 1998. Is that a Botticelli or is that a Botticelli? Anybody? Raphael? Okay, thank you. The back of a blotter piece showing what can happen to you if you don't take your acid. The front of that piece, dancing condoms. Instead of the regular 900 format that is ascribed to a square like this was released in 1998, and it was the first piece of blotter I've seen featuring the new 1024 hit pattern. I guess the extra 24 hits for the shop hands. The back of another piece of blotter, and the front of it. Pink elephants from the Dumbo hallucination scene. Close up. Now, this is when you look up LSD, FBI, that's what's featured on it right now. Oh, sorry. The famous Albert Hofmann bike ride portrayed, re-released in the year 2000, first released in 1993. This is a close-up. Math being 25 hit squares. Here's a full sheet of 500. Also from the same period out of the East Coast USA, Mars Attacks. The back of a normal piece of blotter these days, instead of perfing, since everyone's very aware that Ed Francosa, the DEA agent in charge of blotter studies, who's been at it diligently since 1982, has associated all blotters by studying the machine tool marks left on the paper, disregarding the artwork entirely, and numbering all perf boards patterns that are captured. And so then they're starting to align perfing patterns. So a lot of people don't perf anymore, they just print a grid on the back, like the early days before they had figured out perfing. Pirated Alex Gray with the grid on the back. Another one. These coming out of Canada in around 1997. Very unusual to see an effort out of the frozen few. Some kind of missionary position. And this blotter I thought was significant because you rarely want to trip on a president or his mistress, but I think it's really that love conquers all is why this is made. Here the grid's been moved to the front of the piece of paper. Also the Canadian cartel. This actually came off a video game, I figured out. Not Mars Attacks, the one with the insects. Stormtroopers. Star Troopers, also in a little 100 format here rather than a large 1,000 block. Salvador Dali, heavily ripped off and enjoyed by everyone. Here we move into Europe, and we're talking about 94, if my memory isn't failing me. Really unusual to see Europeans paying tribute to the California artist. This being a local artist, I believe, and also released around 94. Silver Surfer, they call her sometimes. These are 500 blocks. Coming out of Amsterdam in the early 90s, these blotters were busted and pizza cutter handles. Instead of a perfing board, these were laboriously cut by hand. Also the re-release of Mickey's Fantasia. Re-release, or the Dutch Beavis and Butthead coming out about 4 years after the American piece. Very beautiful piece out of Amsterdam, featuring Saturn, a recurring image in LSD, and this one being beautifully perfed and done in blacklight inks, so it glows whether it's loaded or not. Very interesting piece. First one I've ever seen that instead of trying to hide the black quality of the crystal being used to dip it in, is celebrating the occurrence of what is known as black lightning acid, which comes in a liquid form and is very, very dark in color. About a third cheaper than the other one, though. Not just criminals make blotters, this one being done by Interpol and Scotland Yard in the early 90s to entrap me. And they brought it over to my house and said, "We got a lot of blotter. If you give us the crystal, we'll make a lot of money." I said, "If you got a lot of blotter, I'll give you $5 a sheet, you'll make a lot of money." A very rarely seen piece of a beautiful, beautiful man who's been able to join us here tonight. Kevin, could you take a bow? Kevin's a recently released prisoner. One more for us. Another one back on our side, guys. Go easier this time, Kevin. The full sheet. He even got the date right. What was it up there, Kevin? If 6 were 9. 1,000 mushrooms. So 1,000 hit of mushrooms, beautifully executed out of Amsterdam, mid-90s, I suppose. The recurring image of stars coming out of Europe. I guess we're moving backwards in time here, but hey, we're used to that. The incredible Tintin, the close-up, the full sheet. Ants or ohms, the close-up. Full sheet. The back of a sheet of blotter, making it easier by the color patterns to break it up into 100 or 50 blocks in the dark, near the bathroom there. Being the front, and it's an unusual thing. It's actually a fractal of South Africa, and it's when Mandela won the presidency, and Tim signed this one. This is the other effort by the same outfit that same year, and it's called Human Hive, and it also had that same pattern on the back. Not a good idea to make fun of the FBI. This is called FBI mandalas. My last bust, this was the first piece they took off the wall to analyze. A close-up of Carlos Soulslinger's incredible art piece featured on a sheet of blotter known as Liquid Sky. A full sheet. Also done by the same scallywags that did the FBI logo. This one being done on a very nice cotton paper. The red paper is not recommended, however, because it does leave residue in the pan, red residue in the pan. This is the original stat that the Soul Slinger sheet came from. I was able to acquire it, and they told me they photographed it off a skateboard shop in New York City. A cut along from the early 90s, a little regression and paying homage to the Red Dragon hit from 1979. Moons, banana moons in fact, on black paper to conceal the darkness of the crystal. Full sheet. A condor flying over the Andes, the only bird that can. Mad Hatter. These all date from the early 90s. 1,000 musical notes with skulls. This is Tim Leary's funeral piece, and it says SMI squared LE, which was a theory he had about evolution. And then he is returning home as the color that is the note that is Tim Leary, and rainbow bridging back right away. You can see a little death's head on his shoulder. Victor Vassarelli, early 90s. Heavenly Blue Planet, done to raise money for Tim's funeral. Kevin's partner, when Kevin got busted in London, Kevin's partner in America re-released one of Kevin's old pieces by slapping a border on it and putting it out as 900 block instead of a 400 block. That right, Kevin? Apparently so. Did you know about it? Okay, now you know. It's better to know. Kevin's original piece. This is the first piece of blotter Albert Hofmann ever signed. And through a series of finaglings, Tom Lytle got Albert to sign, I think, 17 of them in 1994. And then Albert sent them to Tim Leary, and Tim Leary signed them. And they've been floating around ever since for big bucks, yeah. These being inspired, I believe, by something Kevin read about the bloodline of Christ or some such thing. The famous Escher heads printed both sides in a 50 block, an unusual 50 pattern, but repeating the 5 by 20 computer pattern established in the late 60s. A Jesus blotter, the smaller format, 100 hits of Jesus. And the larger format, 900 hits of Jesus. The problem with these formats is that when you're trying to do a gram of acid to 10,000 hits and you only got 900 formats, you always end up with like a little extra square at the end. So then with this format, you can do 11 900s and 1 100, and you're in there. Alice in Wonderland, escaping from Operation Looking Glass, an operation by the DEA that ended in my first arrest and first acquittal. And so then when I got out, I said, I better do a blotter. First side, and here's the second side. No, first side, and here's the back. And I made her crawling through the little piece of paper and getting away. Miracle. But Felix the cat, when he's in a fix, he opens his bag of tricks. The first Beavis and Butthead in the 900 block, too. The regular logo having changed to like acid rules or something on the t-shirt instead of AC/DC. Rolling Stones acid from the early 90s. The tribute to Nicky Sands acid, Orange Sunshine from the early 90s. A picture of the great, recently departed Acid Eric, may live forever. Goa Gill's in that photo too. An early Goa Gill. And one of Acid Eric's masterpieces, the Gorbachev. This piece is the piece. This is the Gorbachev that broke the wall down, not the other Gorbachev. A close-up. If you can't afford a Warhol, get a Gorby four-way. Rockets. This pattern is very interesting. If you study the perf patterns and what's going on with this, it's the same as the Goonie bird and the barrel of monkeys. Some Tikkun cut-alongs from the early 90s. The famous wavy gravy, but this being the stat, the original stat, rather than the printed 1,000-block piece. The original stat for television static. Mosquito screen acid from the late 80s. Camo acid. Here's when the paperweight got funky. They started printing them on little thinner and thinner pieces of paper, this one being very gossamer. A band self-aggrandizing itself with their logo on Blotter, this one being done by rich kids on LSD in the mid-'80s. Stanley Mouse, Anton Kelly. A very famous piece of blotter printed at Project Artaud Studios in San Francisco in the mid-'80s. Very, very beautifully printed, except the math's weird. You got 49 hits a sheet. Explain it to me. If this is the Rosicrucian acid four-way, you had to cut at the rose. Or the Masonic, if you don't like Rosicrucian, you cut at the crown. Beautifully executed. a traveling pig. These have been dipped and ISO'd, and by taking these very, very high-quality forensic photographs, I'm hoping to show you that you can look at the perf marks and tell what's going on. And just by the little perf marks at the edge, you can start comparing blotters and seeing what's going on. They didn't have, after all the millions they spent on trying to kill me this last prosecution, they didn't have one single forensic photo of blotter. So when I got out, I thought I'd better do my own forensic photos. Here's a full sheet of Traveling Pig from the early 80s. I guess he's going to the show in Basel. The Ganesh you never get to see, heavily dosed. And the famous Ganesh, 1,000 block, untrimmed. The original stat to that. The first son, from around 91. Close up. The strawberries associated with Rajneesh. Strawberries mean love. The floating lotus on a Celtic overprint. The full sheet. A bunch of flavors. Different colors in blotter sometimes mean different years of issue. Sometimes it means different dosage units. Sometimes it means different regions that you're going to distribute it in. The blue lotus being the strongest from this batch. There was a gallery associated with the floating lotus called the Floating Lotus Gallery, busted in the late 80s, sending the blotter artist, a great blotter artist, Forrester, up for a 9.5-year term. This is their palm trees, several colors. And the early Celtic pattern that you saw before, it had been overprinted with the floating lotus. The famous Stars and Waves, which William Rafty was inspired to re-release the other blotter from. 01, not just a binary acid, but I don't know if you've ever been there on acid, but to be the only living thing surrounded by non-living is the condition of man. The famous 1,000 block of hearts, these hearts are like a recurring theme in blotter, and these are done in gold. The yin-yangs, also a recurring image in blotter. In the early days, blotter wasn't easily detected and no one knew what was going on, so they would always print a envelope along with the gram to transport. Envelopes. First Celtic ring from the early 80s. San Francisco blotter, allowing you a choice of individuals you might want to be, picking it. The FBI Snoopy blotter, and this was done as a reaction to a long series of busts on the dead scene, and so they dressed little Snoopy up as an FBI guy. Ants by the great Forrester. Also 100 hits of Mayan. Fabulous. One of the first computer set blotters where, you no longer had to paste up each little piece 1,000 times and photograph it and hassle. You could just have everything placed equidistantly by the computer program. 100 hits of forget his name. Here's a full sheet of the farm chem-inspired dancing test tube, and it was one of the first pieces of blotter I ever saw where they went full color and spared no expense. The famous California chill pill. Let me show you what's going on with it. Here's a full sheet before it's been broken out of the casing. And here's the close-up. You can see that it's a television set, and on the television set, behind the words chill pill, there's man. Oh, there you go. And there's a little color pass behind the words chill pill. And what the story was on the 1,000 sheet is they said there's showing a half-hour TV show on there. And what show do you think it was? I Love Lucy, of course. Also done by the same outfit, the clowns, the famous clowns. Apparently no two clowns are alike. Stars and Moons. The famous Goonie Bird, full sheet. Also by them, the Barrel of Monkeys. These are early 80s. We've arrived backwards to the early 80s. A close-up of one that's been dipped in isoed. You see it loses its color and the acid bites the paper pretty hard. This is California falling into the ocean circa 85, and this is one of my favorite blotter artists because he's also responsible for doing the Albert Hofmann sheet from 1985. Beautifully done. That word pure on there isn't just a illusion. You know, there are some things that are pure and that you don't have to compromise. A close-up of a dipped one that's been isoed. Astrological charts from early 80s. An envelope to transport them in. Thousand block. Colored variations of it. Here's a very famous European piece, and it's the Europeans didn't really need blotter as soon as the Americans because it was the demise with Owsley's pill presses that the real need for blotter paper came into existence. And so Operation Julie didn't close down the pill presses there till 76, I believe. And so then this piece coming out in England in the early 80s, and it's a lot of Supermen. They were really teeny weeny. I'm showing you the original color stat. The first Bob Dobbs, Church of the Subgenius fame. And beautifully done where each head is 2 hits. This was first released in 81, then turned into a 900 block in around 85. Cut along on blotter paper. And blotter paper takes his name because at the birth of blotter, some of the artists thought they needed a lot of absorbency to evenly distribute the substance. And so actual blotter paper is used. This being not an early one, but around the mid-80s, someone re-releasing a look-alike to an early one. Lots of Dove from that period, a recurring symbol. Rainbow circles coming in the early 80s. One of my favorite guys, nicknamed the Wizard, who also did the Escher heads, this being a Gainsborough called Valley of Lost Paradise. very early effort called 50 Japanese Samurai Shields. And this came in its own little carrying case. And the little carrying case would, slip out and you'd open it up and there'd be your bladder. Carefully. This also came in a carrying case, early 80s, celebrating. This was put out to commemorate the assassination of John Lennon and the love of John for Yoko, because John met Yoko by going to her art show, climbing up a ladder and seeing the word yes painted on the ceiling. This is also a brilliant piece because instead of putting ink on there, he grabbed a rice paper, embossed it, and then perfed it. Put out by the Acme Company, no doubt. You see the little words Acme up there at the top. Famous company. Con el Bárbaro from the early 80s, featuring the current California governor. Came in many colors, many varieties. 3 hits of Ozzy Osbourne. How hard up can you be? And these were from the early 80s and came out on early 80 tour hits. I don't know if you've seen them or not. The Rolling Stone logo, also from around that period. This being 1,000 hits. A cut-along manifesto, you're on the road following the dead. You pizza cutter a few of your little flowers. The original Steal Your Face, done in, these were large 4-ways, done around 1980. And instead of a regular perfor, this man's got a stamp machine perfor, very nice. King Tut or Pharaoh acid coming around from the first King Tut show in the late 80s. No one knows what this is, but on the street it got called Jerry on Mushrooms. Lovely, huh? Looks like, no, I don't know who it looks like. Black Cat out of Texas from the Firecracker label. We're moving back in time, so we're all in the late 70s now. The first Mr. Bill, and coming out when that was popularized on Saturday Night Live, but this one alluding to the chemist. Close up. The first clown on acid, Bozo, and it's from Firesign Theaters. We're all bozos on this bus. And I've never been able to find a complete sheet, completely printed and perfed, but this was a matrix of it. And then this is a T-shirt I found of it, portraying what it looked like. Are we over schedule here? A full sheet of stars, a 7-starred pattern. This one being dip, and this one being the brand, circle star that would remain on you, very strong. Stars again, a very popular theme. This one being a general star. These being large ones from the late 70s. When the formats were still larger. Celtic knots. Bridget Riley pattern. Lots of op patterns took place in acid. A lot of the early manufacturers would like to make their things look like hand stamps, and so they would, simplify the acid. This one being, they look like little hand stamps, but they were actually printed and then perfed. This being a full sheet. And so the sloppier you look, the smaller your operation might look. This is real early blotter here. Hits are large. These all being by the same artist, never discovered artist. Dancing frogs, some of the early dragons. Here's a perf dragon 900 block. Once things were in full swing. Anyway, by now you get the idea that there is a lot of blotter going on. What I'm showing you is just a little drop in the bucket. But what I'm telling you is that if I hadn't saved this for you, DEA sure wasn't going to show it to you. And so that's what's really important is that we as people don't give control of this substance to anybody but ourselves. The Leviathan acid preferred by Terence McKenna. Here's a reward. If you can tell me what's in that heart, I'll reward you heavily. This one's featured on Ed Franzosa, the DEA expert's blotter site from 1982. I recommend if you like to study blotter, look at Arrowhead. Arrowhead's got enough information on there so you can see the FBI didn't start collecting blotter till 1983. Ed Franzosa has been there all his life studying blotter for them, and he has a report he put out in 83 where you can see a lot of these blotters I've shown you and his name for them and his little measly 3 or 4 hits of them. But no one knows what's inside this blotter. Well, can you see what's in that heart? Ed Franzosa calls them hearts, but is that the Albert Hofmann blotter we've heard so much about? There was a Blues Brothers blotter. This is just the stat, part of the stat. First trees, acorns, Forrester's own personal logo, because Forrester meant forests are forever, and he was from Oakland. The Olympics we weren't allowed to attend by Jimmy Carter, I guess, 86 at Olympics, you know. What was it? Afghanistan. Afghanistan, yeah. The first suns, and they're New Mexico suns, and you can see they're silk screened in black light paints. That's all you need, silk screen, some paper, boom. Beautiful. First kangaroos, you know, maybe demonstrating that the Australians had a need for acid also. Here's a piece of blotter way into the late 70s, paying tribute to the little to the computer dot blotter. The first moons. This is probably around 77. Bill the Cat, the similar patterning to Zippy the Pinhead, this Zippy being a 4-way, this Zippy being a full. Oh, here's my proof to you guys. Let me. Here's a sheet of Mickey's I brought out. It's outside and you can see it. And what's going on with this is I wanted you to see the packaging. Maybe not. Yeah, packaging that came with it. This was a box that the grams came in, and then wrapped in the box was the label. And this, the famous Mickey blotter, was dipped in Sandoz acid, and perhaps that's why it's so popular. A close up. Here's a home enterprise, you know, where the guy's printing his little sheet of blotter, and he's giving the label of it on the front, and then he never put a grid pattern on the back or anything, so you really don't know if you got to chop that whole card to get the 300 grams, or, you know, but it's still, you can see it's a nice tribute and a really nice idea. Some of the envelopes that the dolphins came in. And these are very, very famous cut-along gold dolphins. The little blue dot pattern in the back, trying to imitate the cut-along blue dot pattern of the early blotters. Envelope for the also cut-alongs. Envelopes for Circle of Life. Here's a sheet of blotter just pretending to be a sheet of computer dot blotter. At this point, I wanted to pay tribute to the great Don Fritz, who died recently in the lean-to in Golden Gate Park, this being one of his masterpieces from the early 80s. May you live forever, Don. His Quinn the Eskimo. He also did the Surfing Shiva and the So You Say and a couple of really great other blotters before he died. Oh, the first Quinn the Eskimo, cut along, heavily dosed. The Blue Unicorn Cafe was the name of the cafe where the Beats met in San Francisco, and all the LSD chemists turned the Beats into hippies. It still exists there today on Hayes Street if you ever want to go there. Hit a sperm. Whenever someone asks me what the first blotter is, I always say this one. This one I find real interesting. There was one blotter man at the birth of blotter that was the birth man of blotter paper. And his blotter is more advanced than any other blotter. This piece being from around 1976. And everyone else could barely get it together to get the pattern right. And this guy was already in full color and very advanced. The Magic Cube from the mid-70s. This is the guy I'm telling you that's kind of advanced. This is from 1977. And look how far out he is already. Leagues ahead of everybody. Close up of our president with Daffy Duck. The famous Jim Franklin piece out of Texas. Texas was a huge blotter consumer. This one going straight to their hearts. A sheet of them. This is back when sheets of blotter were large. And the first sheets of blotter were extremely large. This being 1,200 hit blotter. The original stat for that layup. A masterpiece, early blotter. And you can see what's going on here. He's not only given you the score to the music of the spheres, but he's warning you that each hits 1,000 mics. Here's one that wasn't 1,000 mics, so he's not warning yet. Here's another, I showed you that real grungy piece to start with, you know. The real beautiful, pristine piece, to start with, is the first chromatography paper blotter. And here's what happened later, is they just, would put the dot on other paper. They weren't so hung up on the paper being germ-free. Here's a real amazing sheet you'd never see these days. And this guy, you can see up in the little corner, he's got a little bag with his 50 hits of 5-mic acid and a whole spiel on how 5 mics of acid a day, is enough. And he goes on and on. He even gives you a little technique on how to wash your mouth out first before you eat the blotter. Fuck guy. This guy turned into a federal snitch. Hank Harris turned into a federal snitch. And as far as I know, he's still working. But this was a blotter he put out before he was a snitch. I guess the 5 mics just wasn't enough, dog. Here's all the colors of blotter paper you could get, because a lot of blotter paper is still to this day preferred blank. People consider it more anonymous. And do you have any blank, they say. No image, Thanks for bearing with me on this, I'm responsible for any failure you might see during my talk. Just a blank sheet, but look at the perfor on it. It's strange, different little, and that's what I'm saying, is that they're studying the perf pattern, not the image. A perfing board. This one being a famous 900 block that's been used and is still being used at my house. And instead of running it through a printing press, I'm running it through a, what's that called, a ringer. And blotter, before being perfed, a lot of the blotter was cut along, and I wanted you to see a piece. This is an original stat from mid-70s blotter piece, where the cut-alongs are triangular pieces, and they're not little squares. And so, it really doesn't matter what shape the hit is as long as the dose is right. Also that way, original stat on a cut-along from mid-70s. Foresters. Here's the first Superman, and it's the middle-aged, overweight Superman known as Super Duper. A tribute, really, to Super Joel, if anybody ever knew Super Joel. Here's a full sheet, beautifully done. Here's the first Saturns, cut-along Saturns from around 78. Here's, last lecture I gave at Mind States, there was a printer in the crowd, and he didn't believe me that they were printing in LSD. And so I brought you this to prove it to you, or one of the things I brought. And here you can see that the actual hearts are the only thing on the acetate itself, on the gel. And so then you had to cut these little things out, but they were actually mixing their LSD in the paint, in the ink. And I asked them, well, weren't you worried about losing the LSD? They said, nah, shortage of LSD was not a problem then. So they were printing in it, and I suspect there's still some effort going on now with the way printers work to put the acid in the printer's ink and distribute it with the pixels. Something to think about. Here's a large printed LSD poster from the mid-70s. A smaller one, also printed in LSD. The small little diamonds show off. These were so teeny with it by the time you broke them off there, but they were just showing up. They could finally align this tiny little thing to a little perf. Okay, well, that'll have to do it for me, but thank you so much for putting up for me and my unusual temperament.